Are you experiencing problems here or here? A lot of you might have been told that hip impingement can create hip flexor tightness. I'm going to use this model today to give you an idea of why that's not 100% true. I'm Sebastian, part of the locally world-famous chiropractors in Costa Mesa, California. We see lots of hips and low backs here, lots of hip impingement, so I thought this model today might be of help to you guys. So let's just get right into it. All right, so this is a model of the hip. Some of you might have seen it before. This is the front of the hip, or the iliac crest area. This is the side of the hip. Here's the back of the hip. Here's some of the gluteal muscles. They're not showing everything here. They took part of it off. So the hip normally flexes in this position, so it's flexing, all right? This movement here is similar to going into a squat, all right? It's going into a squat. So the thigh is coming upward and so on, like sitting down. If you take a peek in there, there is the hip joint proper itself, and when it goes up, sometimes there's a pinch point created in the front. This is called hip impingement. Some people have maybe been told they have labral tears or things of that nature. But one thing I want you to notice here is what the hip flexor is doing, or the iliacus or the iliopsoas is doing as we move into hip flexion. Now, obviously, the muscle will be contracting partly, okay? But this model actually provides a fairly good demonstration of why normally the hip stuff that you feel in front, the hip symptoms you feel in front, is more so from the impingement versus the actual tightness of the hip flexor. As we bend up like so, in a closed chain movement such as squatting, the hip flexor is not as active as other parts of the hip. Now, if we performed a simple leg raise, such as this, like if my leg came up off the ground, then the hip flexor would be working a little bit more because this is more open chain in this position. If it's closed chained, like squatting, the leg isn't coming up, the torso is coming down, which is a better representation of what we're seeing here, this bowing and puckering of the hip flexor muscle. Now, again, just to clarify, hip impingement does not necessarily create hip flexor tightness, but sometimes people will feel symptoms of tightness in the area even though there's no actual limitation of movement. Let me explain that. All right, this can get real confusing real quick, and we do have other videos to clarify on some of these things, but I'm going to do my best to make it, to at least provide some food for thought. Now, some people will have hip impingement as they bend forward, or they approximate the thigh and torso, like on this leg. But in this leg, there's no real physical limitations of hip extension. Now, food for thought, if the hip flexor was tight and its job was to flex the hip, as we say, wouldn't it then be limited in hip extension if it truly was tight? Now, logic would say no, the hip extension is there, so the hip flexor is relatively lengthened and loose enough to do its job and to allow the hip to extend, but there's still the feeling of tightness, okay? The feeling of tightness can come from other things. Now, we have other videos on this. We also have a link in the corner over here for a webinar that we cover other types of hip conditions that can create some of the symptoms that you might be noticing. Hip impingement is just one reason for hip pain. It's called internal, all right? We also have external, which is stuff like the hip flexor, right there, but we also have referred. Some types of hip symptoms, such as hip flexor tightness, can be referred from the spine and other types of even organs. But it's really commonly referred from the spine, and we do cover it in that webinar up into there. So if you like this video, subscribe. I apologize, there's no exercises or stretches necessarily, but a lot of times explanation and food for thought I think is a little bit better than just giving you random stuff to do. We have a lot of videos on our channel, lots of stretches and exercises, but sometimes it comes down to providing context. So please subscribe to the channel, check out the search function with all the other exercises we have for hip impingement, and check out the webinar that we have available to you. See you guys next time.